Clergy sex abuse, another possible accusation against Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. We have a report from Rome. Budget battle. Tonight, team coverage as the partial government shutdown reaches day 17, including new details on President Trump's border wall. War on terror. National Security Advisor John Bolton is on a tour of the Middle East, what he's saying about U.S. troops leaving Syria. And breaking the ice. How Christians around the world celebrated the Feast of the Epiphany. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 7th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Trial or no trial? Recent media reports suggest former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick is on trial at the Vatican for sex abuse charges stemming from incidents in the Archdiocese of New York. However, Vatican sources tell our partners at Catholic News Agency his case is not being handled by a full judicial process. In July, McCarrick resigned from the College of Cardinals. He had been the head of the Washington, D.C. Archdiocese from 2001 until 2006. Pope Francis ordered the 88-year-old to lead a life of prayer and penance while the canonical process ran its course. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, what can you tell us about this new development in the case against McCarrick, and what is the Vatican saying?
Lauren, officials from the Archdiocese of New York were delegated by the Holy See to collect depositions, alleged victims, recorded testimonies before the end of December. The Archdiocese was asked to send them along as soon as possible so that the evidence could be reviewed and a decision made regarding McCarrick by the second week of February, presumably to finish before the summit the Pope is convened with bishops to discuss abuse and discern a way forward internationally. The interim director of the Holy See Press Office, Alessandro Gisotti, told me today that for McCarrick, as announced on October the 6th, a canonical process is underway. And to respect the process, the Holy See doesn't intend to make any comment for the moment, but will do so at the conclusion of this process.
So is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith conducting another trial?
Lauren, no, but we are learning of more accusations and charges against ex-Cardinal McCarrick, including the number of victims. An official of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith told me today that the investigation into McCarrick was already done. The new evidence is part of an administrative process, he told me, through which, if he were found guilty, the maximum penalty for McCarrick would be laicization, that is, reduction to the lay state. He'd no longer be able to celebrate sacraments or be referred to as a priest. He wouldn't be a priest. Right now, Lauren, the former Archbishop of Washington is living at a religious residence in Kansas.
Today, during the Holy Father's annual address to the diplomatic corps, he called the abuse of minors one of the vilest and most heinous crimes conceivable. What else did he say?
Lauren, Pope Francis says that next month's meeting of bishops from around the world aims to shed full light on clergy sex abuse and its cover-up. But his speech mostly focused on international affairs. Pope Francis expressed concern over the rise of nationalism in the world, blaming partly the surge on globalization's shortcomings. He shared his gratitude for the Vatican's deal with China, and he said he hoped the initial agreement would lead to the resolution of still open questions and also for greater religious freedom there. It was a lengthy speech held inside the Apostolic Palace, where the Pope voiced his concern to diplomats on migration, conflicts, and praised peace efforts. It's an annual meeting the Pope has with the diplomats every year called his State of the World Address.
Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Joining me now for more analysis is Edward Condon, Washington, D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency. Edward, welcome back to our broadcast.
Great to be here.
What are the penalties facing former Cardinal McCarrick?
Well, facing allegations as he is of sexual abuse, both against minors and adults, really the only penalties on the table will be a life of prayer and penance, which he's already had imposed on him by the Pope, or laicization completely.
And how do we know whether or not Archbishop McCarrick will appeal directly to the Pope? Could he do that?
Well, so a lot depends on the exact process being followed at the CDF. They have a number
CDF is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is essentially the organization that helps Catholic social teaching, and they handle processes like this.
They've got a special disciplinary function when dealing with major crimes in the church. Now, they've made it clear that they're not following a full judicial process. former Cardinal McCarrick is not on trial, so to speak. That is an option.
But that's what we've heard in the media.
That's right, but I think people are using the term somewhat loosely because it is a little difficult to come to full terms with the canonical process and everything available. So while there was the option to put McCarrick on a formal trial with everything that would entail.
Bringing him to Rome, having him sit in front of the CDF.
Sure, having a panel of judges, having lawyers, having a back and forth in writing through written arguments to the judges, they decided not to do that. They're employing a much more stripped down administrative process. Now, what this means is that they clearly feel the evidence against him is compelling, if not overwhelming. Such processes are only ever employed when it seems like a full trial would be unnecessary and a waste of time.
A waste of time, meaning that they know that most likely he's guilty?
That seems to be what we're seeing. Now, whether or not he's laicized remains to be seen. What his avenues of appeal will be depends on exactly how this process ends. If the CDF makes its own determination in its own name, obviously McCarrick can appeal, and in this case he'd be appealing to the Pope directly. Now, another option is that the congregation could come up with their own recommendations and their own recommended penalties and present that to the Pope.
And then the Pope could say yes or no.
Exactly.
I understand.
A decision published in the name of the Pope has no appeal against it possible.
I would imagine not. Why is it so important that this be wrapped up by February, which is when bishops from around the world are coming to discuss the sex abuse crisis?
Well, exactly for that reason. Theodore McCarrick has become, both in the United States and a little bit in Rome and abroad, the face of the sexual abuse crisis in the church right now. He's certainly the most prominent churchman to be facing accusations. The accusations against him are pretty gruesome when you read the details.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Edward Condon, Washington, D.C. editor for the Catholic News Agency.
Thanks for having me.
And in France, a Catholic cardinal and 5 others are on trial in the country's biggest church sex abuse scandal there. Cardinal Philippe Barbarin is among those facing charges of concealing sexual misconduct. The 68-year-old says he is innocent. The case involves a priest accused of abusing Boy Scouts in the 1970s and 80s. He wrote letters to some families of alleged victims confessing to the crime. Stay with EWTN News for the latest in the clergy sex abuse crisis. We'll have developments here on EWTN News Nightly, as well as on our partner sites, the Catholic News Agency and National Catholic Register. President Trump will address the nation tomorrow night to discuss what he calls a crisis at the border. The president will see the problem firsthand when he visits a yet-to-be-announced location on the border on Thursday. Funding for the wall is at the center of the current government shutdown, now the 3rd longest on record. Negotiations over the weekend failed to end the impasse. We have team coverage of the ongoing negotiations, including from Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. But first, let's go to White House correspondent Mark Irons, who is asking top officials why President Trump is comparing a U.S.-Mexico border wall to a wall at the Vatican. Mark?
That's right, Lauren. The president has said if critics say his wall is immoral, then something has to be done about the Vatican wall. And now, after weekend negotiations, he makes it clear a southern border wall isn't debatable, but the materials used are. Instead of concrete, he says a steel barrier could be constructed. Now, it comes with a $5.7 billion price tag.
Entering week 3 of a partial government shutdown. Hundreds of thousands of government employees are going without pay. Weekend negotiations between the White House and Democrats showing no signs of compromise, but President Trump believes they made progress Sunday, tweeting, VP Mike Pence and the group had a productive meeting with the Schumer-Pelosi representatives today. Many details of border security were discussed. We are now planning a steel barrier rather than concrete. It is both stronger and less obtrusive. Good solution and made in the USA. Still, the wall is the main sticking point in negotiations, and Democrats have yet to agree to any funds, regardless of how it's built.
We're not doing a wall. Does anybody have any doubt that we're not doing a wall?
According to a New York Times report, President Trump told House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that, as a, quote, good Catholic, she should support the border wall. But the pro-abortion Democrat says this.
The wall is an immorality. It's not who we are as a nation.
When they say the wall's immoral, well then, you got to do something about the Vatican, because the Vatican has the biggest wall of them all.
We asked White House senior official and Catholic Mercedes Schlapp to explain the comparison. The Vatican wall was built by Pope Leo IV in the 9th century to keep out Muslim raiders. It only surrounds part of the Vatican.
Why is the president making comparisons between the southern border wall and the Vatican border wall? How are they comparable?
Walls work.
The Vatican wall isn't used to keep out illegal migrants. What's the comparison?
They're not, illegal migrants are not going surging over the Vatican wall. They're coming to our southern borders. It's a crisis that we have
Now, the vice president told reporters this afternoon no decision has been made on whether the president will declare a national emergency in order to boost border security and possibly fund a southern border wall. But the president made that proposal Friday. The vice president says it's something that's still being considered. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons holding feet to the fire. Thank you, Mark. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi vows to begin passing individual spending bills in order to reopen federal agencies one by one. She plans to start with the Treasury Department to make sure you get your tax refund. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi continues our team coverage with what lawmakers are saying about this shutdown. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Speaker Pelosi says tax refunds shouldn't be held hostage by the president. After more negotiations today, the White House says those tax refunds will go out even if there's a shutdown. The White House sent a letter to lawmakers asking for a steel border barrier, but Democrats say they want a full accounting of how that money is going to be spent. Tonight, the shutdown showdown is stuck in a standstill.
Day 17 of the partial government shutdown, and still a wall divides the president and Democratic leaders.
I think most New Yorkers and most Americans agree with me. We want the symbol of America to stay as the Statue of Liberty, not a big concrete wall.
Democrats say President Trump's plan to go around Congress is flimsy. The president might declare a national emergency, then use other funding to build the wall. Democrats would likely sue.
Realize that in the year 2000, there were 200,000 people at peak coming to our border, 200,000. We're at about a fifth of that right now. So how could this possibly be framed as a national emergency?
Democratic Senator Doug Jones of Alabama says the president's border security plan is short on details.
We've been talking about dollars and cents and not plans. Soon as I think people see plans and see how money is going to be spent, that's what Congress is supposed to do. We're supposed to be the good stewards of the people's money, and we have not seen those plans.
Republican John Katko of New York calls on both sides to make a deal.
Democrats want border security, and the president wants a wall. But you can't have border security without barriers, and that's why we already have 700 miles of barriers. So what we're really talking about here is enhancing those barriers to make the border more secure. So why can't both sides just sit down and just hash out the terminology and get it done? I think we can all win on that.
If the shutdown runs through tomorrow, impacted federal workers risk missing this week's paychecks. Americans blame both sides of the stalemate. A HuffPost poll last week found about half of Americans don't approve of how congressional Democrats have handled the shutdown. The president fared just 2 points better. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi wrapping up our shutdown coverage. Thank you, Jason. Former Vice President Joe Biden says he will announce if he'll run for president soon. The Democrat from Delaware is considering his third run to become president. Among Democratic contenders for 2020, Biden is currently leading in several polls. The 76-year-old would become the second Catholic if elected, after John F. Kennedy. For the first time in more than 25 years, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has missed oral arguments. The 85-year-old is still recovering from surgery last month to remove 2 cancerous nodules from her lung. The court says Ginsburg will still be able to vote on cases by reviewing transcripts of arguments. National Security Advisor John Bolton says the U.S. is moving forward with President Trump's plan to withdraw 2,000 troops from war-torn Syria. He's promising U.S. allies it will be orderly. But some faith-based groups are warning the move puts Christians at risk. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Tonight, John Bolton is in Turkey, pressing the NATO ally to promise it won't attack Kurdish fighters in Syria. The Kurds are helping the U.S. military in the fight against ISIS, but Turkey sees some Kurdish forces as terrorists. Until the U.S. gets Turkey's promise, Bolton says they will not withdraw troops from Syria.
We're going to be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated.
National Security Advisor John Bolton telling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the U.S. is committed to protecting its allies in the Middle East, even as they plan to withdraw troops from Syria. Bolton making a stop in Israel before traveling to Turkey, where the Turkish military is moving vehicles and weapons to its border with Syria. The buildup follows President Trump's surprise announcement in December to withdraw all 2,000 American troops from Turkey's war-torn neighbor.
I made it clear from the beginning that our mission in Syria was to strip ISIS of its military strongholds. We're not nation building. Rebuilding Syria will require a political solution.
But faith-based groups helping displaced Syrians say it will take more than a political solution. Aid to the Church in Need warns Syria is still facing a humanitarian crisis. Other charities, including Christian aid program Northern Iraq, say Christians could be at risk if U.S. troops left the country. In the last 4 months, more than 10,000 civilians have fled ISIS-controlled areas, seeking food, medicine, and shelter. Today, Pope Francis told diplomats he's praying for the Syrian people.
Di ciò è stata anche la partecipazione.
The Holy Father noting the high death toll in Syria and asking the international community to promote an end to the conflict. Since Syria's civil war began almost 8 years ago, nearly 500,000 people have died and millions more have fled the country. The conflict in Syria continues to be a high priority for the new leadership here at the Pentagon. The acting Defense Secretary, Patrick Shanahan, took over after James Mattis issued his resignation last month. And the president doesn't appear to have any plans to find another long-term replacement for Mattis, tweeting, "Patrick Shanahan is doing a great job." Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. An advocate of Vatican-China relations is the interim leader of the Diocese of Hong Kong. Cardinal John Tong had retired in 2017. He is 79 years old. He was selected over a bishop who was next in line, but had been critical of Beijing. Coming up, a policy expert examines immigration and the stalemate over President Trump's border wall. The partial government shutdown has closed most immigration courts, adding to the backlog of migrant cases, according to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, which is a data gathering, research, and distribution organization at Syracuse University. As of November 2018, the number of cases on the court's active docket topped more than 809,000. That's a 49% increase since January 2017. Joining me now is Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Theresa, welcome back to our broadcast.
Good to be here, Lauren.
Last night, the White House formally asked lawmakers to provide this $7 billion beyond what the Appropriations Committee had passed in their bipartisan Homeland Security spending bill last year. Tell us what that money is. We know 5.7 is for a border wall, but there are a lot of other asks here. What are they?
So the administration put in their request, asks for more Border Patrol agents, another 750 more Border Patrol agents, more Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE agents in the interior, more detention beds, but they also asked for more immigration judges to help deal with those backlogs in the immigration courts, and $800 million in what they're calling humanitarian assistance, which they have said could include things like medical care for children in CBP custody, possibly new more family-friendly processing centers to deal with the border.
Why do you think they're asking for that now?
I think that these are things, particularly the immigration judges and the humanitarian, that they think Democrats will want. And maybe they are things that they believe can help break the impasse if Democrats are willing to agree with them. But it's all contingent on that border wall funding. That's still the number one.
What everyone is asking is, could President Trump do what he says he wants to do, which is go around Congress and ask for a sort of a national emergency?
There's a lot of discussion and debate on this, and I think a lot of lawyers are looking at it different ways. He does have authority to declare a national emergency, but whether or not that gives him the authority to build border wall is another question. A lot of that authority has to do with Defense Department and allowing the Defense Department to build things when they need to support military activities. It's never been used domestically, and of course, for the most part, securing the border is not a military activity, it's a law enforcement activity. So I'm sure that would he try to do this, there'd be some legal challenges, and certainly a lot of members of Congress are questioning that.
could be one of the reasons that he is going on Thursday. But let's talk about the cooperation efforts between the U.S. and Mexico and the Central American countries that people are fleeing. We had heard that Mexico would house people seeking asylum in the United States. What have we heard since that decision?
Sure. So since before the shutdown, there was this announcement of this Remain in Mexico policy that the United States is going to do, that Mexico had agreed, at least on a limited basis, that they would help provide work visas and other supports to migrants waiting. We really have heard nothing from the administration about that. We don't know if that policy is effectively in place right now. And the Mexican government really hasn't said much either. All the focus has really shifted to this conversation about the government shutdown and the border wall.
And it's going to be the longest government shutdown if it lasts through Saturday. Thank you so much, Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Up next, Pope Francis sends a message to Orthodox faithful, and how Christians around the world celebrated the Feast of the Epiphany.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buon Natale e felice anno nuovo.
Pope Francis sent Christmas and New Year's greetings to Orthodox Christians in Egypt. He honored the opening of the major Coptic cathedral in Cairo, on the right of this photo, next to a mosque. The Cathedral of the Nativity has room for more than 8,000 people. The Orthodox Church in Ukraine officially severs ties with the Russian Orthodox Church after having been under its rule since the 17th century. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I signing that agreement Saturday. Afterward, officials celebrated Holy Mass. Among those in attendance, Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko. Finally tonight, Christians around the world celebrated the Epiphany yesterday. Worshippers plunged into icy waters, why I'll never know, and thousands enjoyed parades. Pope Francis marked the Epiphany feast day at the Vatican by urging people to follow the path of humble love and care for those who can give nothing back. For the Catholic Church, January 6th recalls the journey of the three Magi, also known as kings or wise men, to find Jesus in Bethlehem. In Madrid, thousands of families packed the streets Saturday to watch a parade marking the eve of the feast. Thousands of Orthodox Christians took a dip in icy lakes and rivers across Bulgaria to commemorate the baptism of Jesus. Dozens dressed in white embroidered shirts waded into the river, waving national flags and singing folk songs. In Poland, hundreds of thousands of people have participated in colorful Epiphany processions in more than 700 locations across the predominantly Catholic country. And about 40,000 people of all ages wearing paper crowns walked in the procession in downtown Warsaw. And in Rome, an Epiphany parade with 1,400 people marching down the main road leading to the Vatican. The parade featured La Befana, an Italian folklore tradition, a witch who brings candy to children. I like a witch in a white car. Balance there. I don't know. Can she really be a witch? For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.